What if the person quietly pouring your coffee knew exactly who was stealing from her and had the receipts to prove it? Hello, wonderful listeners! You brilliant minds and justice-loving hearts, welcome back to a story that will shake you. Today we take you behind the scenes of a family buffet where corruption simmered under the surface, until an undercover CEO walked in wearing a ranger vest and left serving justice hot. If you believe in truth, fairness, and the power of one courageous worker to change everything, this is the story for you. Buckle up, because breakfast is about to get explosive. The rain came down in sheets, blurring the windshield of the gray Toyota Corolla as Martin Keating pulled into the crowded parking lot of Harvest Hills Buffet at 12, the flagship location of the family-style chain he'd spent nearly 3 decades building from the ground up. Dressed in a weathered ranger's vest, hiking boots, and a baseball cap pulled low over salt and pepper hair, Martin looked nothing like the multimillionaire CEO of Keating Hospitality Group. And that was exactly the point. Today he wasn't arriving as the founder who'd shaken hands with governors and chefs alike. He was Frank Delaney, a retired park ranger from Michigan, passing through to visit his grandkids. Just another face in the brunch crowd. Martin had learned long ago that polished reports could lie, and regional managers often saw only what they wanted to see. But the anonymous message that had landed in his personal inbox last week hadn't been vague or dramatic. It was calm, deliberate, and devastating. Someone's stealing tips here. They've got it rigged. If you're really the kind of boss the posters say you are, come see for yourself. That one message had been enough to override his calendar, send his executive assistant scrambling, and bring him to a buffet he'd once proudly featured in investor brochures. If someone was manipulating tip distributions and intimidating staff, Martin would know, and he'd fix it himself. The buffet's glowing sign flickered in the morning drizzle as families in church clothes and retirees in flannel made their way through the automatic glass doors. Martin gave a nod to a group of regulars chatting by the umbrella stand and stepped inside. The scent of maple sausage, warm biscuits, and strong coffee wrapped around him like a familiar blanket. It was exactly how he remembered the place smelling 15 years ago when they first opened. But underneath the golden lighting and cheerful brunch chatter, Martin sensed a tension. A young hostess gave him a distracted nod, barely meeting his eyes as she led him to a booth near the carving station. Perfect view of the dining room and the register. As he settled into the seat, he pulled out his phone, not to scroll, but to take notes. His eyes scanned the staff. He wasn't here for the food. He was here for the truth. And if the rumors were real, the people doing the stealing wouldn't see him coming until it was far too late. Martin sipped slowly from the chipped ceramic mug the hostess had left at his table without a word. The coffee was decent, but it wasn't what caught his attention. It was the rhythm of the restaurant. Or rather, the lack of it. Harvest Hills Buffet had always prided itself on smooth, coordinated service during peak hours. But today the flow felt jagged and uneven, like a song being played out of tune. From his booth, Martin had a full view of the main floor and most of the beverage station, where a server in a crisp maroon uniform, Janelle Ruiz, her name tag read, was darting between tables with the focus of a field medic. Janelle moved fast, balancing plates, refilling coffee, clearing dishes, and answering questions from an elderly couple who couldn't find the sugar-free syrup. Her ponytail bounced with each stride, and though she smiled at customers, there was a tightness around her eyes that said she hadn't sat down in hours. In contrast, 2 young male employees, Tyler and Owen, leaned against the counter near the dessert bar, chatting idly and nudging each other whenever Janelle passed by. They each had only a couple of tables and seemed in no rush to do more. Martin watched them carefully, noting how often they hovered near the register or hung back when trays needed clearing. Guests noticed, too. A gray-haired man muttered to his wife, "That girl's the only one working in this whole place," as Janelle passed. The wife nodded, replying, "If they're tipping anyone, it better be her." Martin made a mental note. The tipping system here was supposed to be pooled and shared, but clearly the workloads were anything but equal. He watched as a hostess seated a large party in Janelle's section, despite multiple open tables elsewhere, another red flag, overburdened, yet somehow the default for every new customer. Martin jotted more observations in his phone. Disparity. Favoritism. Low morale masked with customer-facing politeness. These were the same signs he'd seen in the early years of expansion, before he learned to listen closely to the workers instead of the reports. The most telling moment came when Janelle, visibly out of breath, approached a side cart with empty trays, paused just long enough to crack her knuckles discreetly, then straightened up and kept moving. It wasn't just bad management. It was systemic neglect. Something or someone had turned Harvest Hill's buffet into a place where the hardworking were punished with more work and the favored few coasted with impunity. And Martin Keating had just begun to peel back the first layer. Martin waited until the rush had eased slightly before gently initiating a conversation. Janelle had just cleared 6 plates from the booth behind him and was on her way back to the kitchen when he gave a friendly wave and a warm smile. "Excuse me, miss," he said in his rehearsed, gravelly tone. "Any chance I could trouble you for some more of that dark roast? Tastes just like what we brewed at Ranger Camp back in the day." She offered a polite smile, genuine, but worn. "Of course, sir," she replied. "Be right back." She returned swiftly with a fresh pot and poured it smoothly, her hands steady even as fatigue showed in the slump of her shoulders. "You run a tight ship," Martin commented casually, glancing around. "Looks like you're handling half the floor yourself." Janelle hesitated. Just a flicker. Her smile didn't vanish, but her eyes briefly darted to the side, scanning the dining room. "We just stay busy, that's all," she said, her voice calm but clipped. "Some of us get more assigned coverage more than others." The words were careful, measured, like someone speaking in a place where walls had ears. Martin leaned in slightly, adopting the posture of a lonely old man making conversation. "Back when I was working the fire watchtowers in Oregon, we had a saying. Whoever pulls the long shift better get their fair share of the coffee beans or the whole crew burns out." Janelle laughed softly. Just a breath, but it was real. "Wish it worked that way here," she murmured, eyes now fixed on the pot as she refilled his cup. "It's complicated." He tilted his head. "How so?" Again she paused. "Just depends on who's running the register," she said finally. "Some folks always seem to be the ones closing out the tabs." She looked up, her eyes meeting him. "And some folks get told the rest will be made right later." Her voice lowered slightly, barely above the hum of the buffet's overhead fans. "It never is." Before Martin could respond, a voice barked from the kitchen doorway. Greg Moretti, the manager, gesturing toward Janelle with a clipboard in hand. "Food runner's late again. Can you cover pan refills for Station 2? She nodded quickly and disappeared, professionalism snapping back into place like armor. Martin sat back, his coffee growing cold. He'd just been handed his first breadcrumb, and the trail ahead looked rotten. After Janelle disappeared behind the kitchen doors, Martin shifted his attention to the real show playing out near the register. Greg Moretti, the buffet's general manager, stood with arms crossed and a smirk on his face, exchanging inside jokes with 2 younger employees, Tyler and Dylan. Martin had already noted that Dylan rarely moved beyond the cash wrap area, yet every card payment in the past hour had passed through his hands. Despite not taking a single order or delivering a single plate, Dylan stayed logged into the digital POS terminal like a gatekeeper. Every server transaction, whether it originated from Janelle or another overworked staff, seemed to funnel back to him, and only him. The dynamic was unmistakable. Greg barked at servers with clipped instructions but chuckled warmly at Dylan's lazy anecdotes. Tyler lingered nearby, throwing exaggerated sighs when asked to bus a table, yet Greg gave no pushback. Martin's eyes narrowed. He'd seen this before. What corporate reports often labeled informal leadership structures or internal culture clusters. In plain speak, cronyism, nepotism, a quiet hierarchy where favors replaced fairness. But what truly sealed Martin's suspicions came 15 minutes later when a middle-aged server named Carla, sweating and visibly stressed, brought a tray of drinks to a family of 6. She then walked to the terminal to close out the bill, only to be waved off by Dylan, who slid in front of her and tapped through the screen with casual ownership. Carla gave a half smile and walked away, but the resignation in her eyes was unmistakable. Martin pulled up the staff schedule on the digital kiosk near the bathrooms, publicly posted for transparency, supposedly. Dylan and Tyler consistently worked peak hours, were assigned limited table zones, and, curiously, shared most of their shifts with Greg himself. Janelle, Carla, and 2 others rotated more frequently, covered wider sections, and had fewer register access blocks. This wasn't a fluke. It was a shadow network, operating just beneath the surface of buffet trays and refill stations. The real transactions weren't just about pancakes and scrambled eggs. They were about control, manipulation, and profit. Martin had come looking for management flaws. What he'd found was something far worse: a family-run racket hiding behind name tags and roast beef carving stations. Martin returned the next morning, dressed the same hat, same ranger vest, same calm demeanor. The Sunday rush had passed, and the late morning lull offered the perfect opportunity. Janelle approached his booth to refill his coffee again, her movements slightly more relaxed than the day before, but no less precise. "Back again?" she asked with a faint smile. "Guess I like good coffee," Martin replied, offering her a wink, "and I don't mind good company either." She chuckled, but the fatigue in her eyes was deeper today, less physical, more spiritual. After a moment of silence, Martin spoke low. "About yesterday, the register thing, that ever get made right?" Janelle's smile disappeared. She looked around the half-empty dining room, then slid into the edge of the booth opposite him, just for a moment. "I probably shouldn't say this," she began, voice barely above a whisper. "But you seem like someone who gets it. I've been working here for almost 4 years. Started when I was 19. My mom had just passed, and I needed flexible hours while I took night classes." She reached into her apron and pulled out a small notepad, creased and stained from use. Tucked inside was a folded sheet of paper and a printed spreadsheet. "I keep records," she said, laying them out carefully. "This column here? That's what the POS reports say I earned in tips on my logged hours. And this column," she tapped with her pen, "that's what actually shows up in my paycheck." Martin studied the figures. Over the course of just 1 month, she was short more than $600. 0 cents. "That's groceries, rent, my kids' asthma meds," she said quietly. "Greg says they'll settle it in cash, but it never adds up. And if I ask, I get fewer shifts. Or the worst ones, Monday nights, rain days, late lunch with no traffic. I tracked everything. I even screen recorded a few transactions where I served the table, but the tip was processed under Dylan's name. But it's like screaming into the wind." Martin looked up from the papers. "Why haven't you brought this to corporate?" Janelle gave a tired laugh. "We're told to bring problems to Greg, and when I asked for the hotline number, he said he'd take care of it internally. He took care of it all right, started calling me paranoid, and pulled me off register access." She glanced toward the kitchen. "If they knew I was telling you this, I'd be gone tomorrow. But someone has to say something, even if it doesn't change a thing." Martin folded the paper gently, then slid it back toward her. "It will," he said softly. "I promise you, it will." 2 days later, Martin returned, but this time he wasn't alone. At his side was Naomi Briggs, head of internal investigations for Keating Hospitality Group, posing as his daughter, Emily Delaney. Dressed in business casual attire and armed with a discreet recording app built by the company's legal team, Naomi slipped into character with ease. The late breakfast crowd buzzed around them as they were seated, conveniently near the POS terminal in the dessert bar. Martin had requested it, claiming he liked watching the cobbler get scooped fresh. Dylan, lounging at the register, barely glanced up. As expected, Janelle wasn't assigned to their table. "Rotation policy," she explained apologetically when she dropped off their coffee. "Manager wants everyone to get equal exposure." Martin just nodded. The trap had already been set. When the bill arrived, Martin pulled out a prepaid Keating loyalty card, custom loaded with $60 0 cents. "Can we add a $100 0 cents tip?" he asked with casual charm. "You've all been so great, and my daughter here insists on spoiling the staff." Dylan's eyes lit up. "Absolutely," he said, grabbing the card like it was a prize-winning raffle ticket. From a nearby table, Naomi discreetly activated the time-stamped audio recording. Dylan processed the transaction swiftly, never calling Janelle over, even though she'd refilled their drinks and cleared their plates. As Dylan walked back to the register, Martin leaned toward Naomi and whispered, "Let's see where the money really goes." By noon, back at their temporary operations base at a nearby hotel conference room, the investigation team had already accessed the POS server. The digital breadcrumb trail was clear. The $100 0 tip, though attributed to Table 9, Janelle's section had been logged under Employee ID DH378, belonging to Dylan Henderson. Luis, the lead analyst, leaned back in his chair and pointed at the screen. "Got him," he said flatly. And that wasn't all. By cross-referencing the last 30 days of loyalty card transactions, the team confirmed a pattern of misdirection. High-value tips, repeatedly logged under a small group of employees, all tied to Greg. At least $4,000, 0 cents, had bypassed rightful earners in the past 2 weeks alone. Martin stared at the screen, jaw tight. The next step was clear. It was time to go public. Friday morning dawned bright and crisp, a rare break in the overcast October skies. The parking lot of Harvest Hills Buffet 12 filled quickly as families, retirees, and regulars filed in for the early brunch rush. Inside, trays were steaming, coffee was flowing, and Greg Moretti stood near the register with his usual smug oversight, offering shallow greetings to customers and nodding at Dylan, who once again manned the POS terminal. The scene hummed with predictable routine, until the 3 black SUVs pulled into the lot. They parked side by side, blocking the front entrance with precision. Diners turned their heads as the doors opened, and a coordinated team of 4 exited, followed by Martin Keating, no longer in his ranger disguise, but in a tailored charcoal gray suit. The founder and CEO of Keating Hospitality had arrived, and this time he wanted to be seen. As Martin entered, the restaurant seemed to pause mid-bite. Forks hovered in mid-air. Conversations halted. Behind the buffet line, a server stopped mid-scramble. Janelle, placing a basket of biscuits on a side cart, froze as she recognized him not as Frank the friendly traveler, but as the man whose name was engraved on the employee plaque in the front lobby. Greg stepped forward, flustered but trying to mask it with a smile. "Mr. Keating, what a surprise! I didn't realize the corporation was visiting today." Martin's voice was calm but cold. "That's because we didn't announce it, Greg." Behind him, Naomi and her legal team began distributing folders to the employees and setting up a screen on a mobile easel. "Ladies and gentlemen," Martin addressed the diners, "please enjoy your meals in the house today. Unfortunately, we're conducting an emergency leadership review at this location." He turned toward Greg and Dylan. "Greg Moretti, Dylan Henderson, step forward." They hesitated. Dylan turned instinctively toward the kitchen exit, but Naomi stepped into his path, arms crossed. Martin lifted a folder and began reading aloud. "Over $18,000, 0 cents in digital gratuities diverted through a fraudulent POS classification system, tip theft, payroll manipulation, suppression of complaints, favoritism." Greg sputtered, "I can explain." "You'll have that chance." In court, Martin interrupted. Turning to the staff, Martin declared, "As of this moment, both Greg Moretti and Dylan Henderson are terminated from Keating Hospitality Group. The company will pursue legal action and full restitution. And, to those of you who were silenced or shortchanged, I heard you." The restaurant erupted in stunned silence. Then, slowly, one of the older cooks clapped. Then another. Within seconds, the dining room was filled with the sound of applause. Not for the CEO, but for the truth. As the sound of applause faded and the former manager and his nephew were quietly escorted out the side door, Martin turned to the remaining staff. Their faces reflected a mix of shock, relief, and uncertainty, like survivors emerging after a storm. Janelle stood near the beverage station, frozen in place, a towel in one hand and disbelief etched across her features. She had barely moved since Martin revealed his true identity. Her eyes shimmered, not with fear, but something else. Hope, edged with disbelief. Martin walked slowly to her, stopping just a few feet away. "Janelle Ruiz," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. "You spoke the truth when no one else would. You tracked the facts. You kept working, kept showing up, even when the system worked against you. That kind of integrity is what this company was built on." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a freshly embroidered apron, neatly folded. The name J. Ruiz was stitched in gold thread above the title, Assistant General Manager. Janelle's hand flew to her mouth. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Martin replied gently. "But you do need to accept this, because starting today, you'll help lead this restaurant. And more than that, you're going to help us redesign how tip distribution works in every Keating Hospitality location. No more secrets, no more silent theft. You've earned this." Tears streamed down Janelle's face as she took the apron with trembling hands. The staff clapped again, louder now, joined by guests who stood and cheered from their booths. One young busser let out a joyful "Yes!" as if his team had won the championship. Naomi stepped forward and handed Janelle a folder. "This includes back pay calculations. We've run the numbers. You're not just getting a promotion, you're getting paid what you were owed." Janelle nodded through her tears, then hugged the apron to her chest. "Thank you, not just for me, but for everyone who felt invisible." Martin smiled. "That's the real job, Janelle, making sure no one feels that way again." 1 month later, Harvest Hill's Buffet 12 looked much the same from the outside, the same warm beige paint, the same marquee sign boasting home of the $10.00 brunch, but inside, everything had changed. The dining room buzzed with a different kind of energy now, one fueled by mutual respect and shared purpose rather than silent resentment. Gone were the hushed tones and exhausted expressions. Staff moved with rhythm, communicating clearly, rotating tasks with fairness. The tension that once hung in the air like grease had lifted. A flat-screen monitor now hung above the drink station, displaying real-time tip data, visible to every employee. Each server had a personalized login badge, and the new point-of-sale system tracked exactly who processed which transaction and how the tips were split. Transparency wasn't just a buzzword anymore, it was policy. Janelle Ruiz, now in her new Assistant General Manager uniform, walked the floor with quiet authority. Her crisp shirt was neatly tucked, and her golden nameplate caught the light as she stopped to greet a table of regulars. The dark circles that once shadowed her eyes had softened, replaced by a quiet confidence. Her posture had changed too, shoulders back, chin lifted. This was no longer a woman surviving a job. She was someone shaping the future of the workplace around her. In the back office, Martin stood beside her, reviewing the weekly metrics. Customer satisfaction was up 17%. Staff turnover had dropped to 0. For the first time in 2 years, the buffet had received a perfect compliance score from the regional inspector. "I hardly recognize the place," Martin said with a smile. Janelle laughed. "Some of the staff say the energy feels brand new. Others say it finally feels the way it was supposed to all along." On the wall behind her desk hung a framed printout of the spreadsheet she once showed Martin, the one that proved the theft. Now, it was a reminder not of injustice, but of courage. Below it, in her son's handwriting, was a crayon drawing of the two of them, her in a badge, him holding her hand. The caption read, "My mom is the boss now." Before leaving, Martin walked through the kitchen, shaking hands, thanking staff, and stopping briefly to study a newly mounted plaque just outside the manager's office. The mission statement, drafted with Janelle and voted on by the entire staff, read, "Fairness isn't a feature, it's a promise. Here, every hand matters." Martin smiled and nodded. "That'll do just fine." As Martin Keating stepped out into the brisk morning light, the scent of warm bread and maple glaze followed him out the door of Harvest Hill's Buffet 12. Behind him, Janelle was already briefing her morning crew, pointing to the rotating schedule chart and checking in with the new hire, nervously adjusting his cap. It had taken years to build the company, but only one honest voice, one spreadsheet tucked in an apron to remind him why it mattered. He slid into the front seat of his SUV, glanced one last time at the glowing sign above the entrance, then pulled a manila folder from the passenger seat. Another report, another tip, this one from a buffet location in Cedar Bluff, Iowa. The contents were distressingly familiar: unexplained shifts in register access, high turnover, and disappearing tips. He sighed, but not with weariness, with purpose. On the dashboard sat a framed copy of Janelle's original spreadsheet, laminated now and etched with the words, "Truth leaves a trail." He kept it there as a compass, a reminder that data, when held in honest hands, could topple even the most entrenched abuse. He pulled out his phone and dialed Naomi. "We're heading to Cedar Bluff," he said. "Let's move quiet, no announcement, same approach." "Understood," she replied. "Want the legal team prepped?" "Absolutely. And Naomi," he added, "let's bring Janelle into the design committee full time. She's already reshaped one store. I want her insights to scale company-wide." As he hung up and started the engine, Martin reflected on the journey, not just this past month, but the long road that brought him here. In the early days, he believed growth was the goal: more stores, more revenue, more recognition. But now, older and wiser, he understood something more profound. Growth without integrity rots from the inside. And no company, no matter how polished its branding, could survive that for long. As his SUV rolled onto the main road, he smiled faintly. Somewhere out there, in another dining room, another Janelle was fighting to be seen. Maybe she didn't have the words yet, or the proof in her hands, but she had eyes watching her, and a voice that deserved to be heard. And Martin Keating would be listening. Because at Keating Hospitality, the real legacy wasn't built on buffet lines. It was built on trust, one table at a time. The story of Harvest Hill's Buffet 12 teaches a powerful lesson about leadership, accountability, and the quiet strength of integrity. At its core, it reminds us that justice often begins with one brave voice, someone like Janelle Ruiz, who chooses truth over silence, even when the cost feels high. Her determination to document the wrongdoing, despite exhaustion and fear of retaliation, became the catalyst for change that transformed an entire workplace. For Martin Keating, the Undercover CEO, the experience reaffirmed that true leadership isn't about titles or polished reports. It's about showing up, listening to the unheard, and acting decisively when things go wrong. By stepping into the shoes of his employees, he uncovered corruption that would have stayed hidden behind layers of favoritism and manipulation. The lesson is simple but profound. Fairness isn't automatic. It must be built, protected, and proven every day. And when leaders pair empathy with action, the results ripple far beyond the walls of any one restaurant. In a world that often rewards shortcuts and silence, this story celebrates those who take the long road to do what's right and the lasting legacy that follows when they do. Let this story be a call to act, to speak up, and to lead with integrity.